is the new 2025 Audi RS6 Avant GT, and it's a very special version of a very special car. It's an Audi RS6 inspired by an old Audi race car with just 660 units for the entire world and some very special upgrades. And today I'm going to review the new RS6 Avant GT and show you all of its quirks and features. Alright, time for the quirks and features, starting with an overview. The Audi RS6. As you already know, Audi's high-performance luxury wagon, a very special car. This is the new GT model with ultra-limited production. Only 660 of these are going to be built, and only 85 are coming to the United States. So, what makes it different compared to a regular RS6? Well, the most obvious part is a very distinctive livery design on the outside, as you can see. The car is mostly white, but there's some like orange, red, and gray, and black, and it certainly doesn't look like your typical RS6 as you look around the car. A totally different exterior color scheme. You can see it has white wheels, which are obviously different. The whole car is very different and distinct from your typical RS6 color scheme. So, where did this come from? The answer is it was inspired by a 1980s, late 80s, early 90s Audi race car. Specifically, the Audi 90 IMSA race car, which was very successful and has become an iconic model in Audi's racing history. You can see the two cars directly next to each other, and you can see the obvious resemblance in their color schemes on the outside, and where this new RS6 GT draws its inspiration from this very famous old school Audi race car, which does look tremendously cool and exciting in its livery. And then this one was brought to the street in the new RS6, although admittedly toned down a bit compared to the race car. It doesn't quite have the same level of graphics at all the places, but you definitely get the connection between the two cars. And interestingly, the connection goes a lot deeper than just the graphics on the outside. There's a lot of subtle details about the race car that have been transferred over to the road-going RS6 GT. One is the white wheels. They didn't just do the exterior graphics and colors, they did the wheels too. And you can see the race car also has white wheels, which obviously was the inspiration for the white wheels on the road car as well. Another fantastic detail that's shared between the RS6 GT and the old school IMSA race car is the double wing. You can see it here on the race car. Obviously, it is really massive in the race car, very big and very noticeable. You can't really get away with doing that in a road car, especially a wagon, since the wing is starting from the roof line, but you still do have a double wing back here. You can see the regular wing right above the rear window, and then a second one above that, and painted in this orange-red that matches the color of the wing on the original IMSA race car, which is a pretty cool detail. And it goes even further. The front splitter in the RS6 GT, you can see it here, it comes out further than the standard RS6 front splitter and generally has a different sort of lower front end design compared to the standard RS6. That also was inspired by the race car, which you can see has this low front splitter finished in the same color. And again, you can see where this car is drawing its inspiration. Again, not just the livery, but some other details too. Probably my favorite detail of the RS6 GT that was pulled from the race car is the fender design. The GT has its own distinctive fender, as you can see here, and there's a vent in the back of it. This is for brake cooling. The regular RS6 doesn't get this, but the Audi 90 IMSA race car does indeed have it, although it's more pronounced in the back. You can see the same basic design. The wide fender and then the vent directly behind the wheel as the fender sort of goes out rather than curving back into the body, and that's been incorporated into the road car. It's a very cool touch. Now, interestingly, despite this car's heritage with the IMSA race car that shared its basic color scheme on the outside, Audi is offering this car in 3 different colors. There's a white, a gray, and a black version of the RS6 GT. But for the US market, we're only getting the white one, which frankly makes sense. That's the one that actually ties into the IMSA race car and matches its color scheme, so I think it suits the car best. But anyway, back on the subject of fenders. I mentioned that these fenders are different with their brake cooling duct in the back, and they're also different because they're made of carbon fiber, unlike the fenders on the regular Audi RS6. That, of course, helps save weight, and they've done the same with the hood. It is also carbon fiber. And you can see these hood stripes are not just graphics like the rest of the car has, but some exposed carbon fiber to help remind you of the special hood in this special car. And there's more upgrades to the RS6 GT beyond just that. This car doesn't get a sunroof, which is an interesting detail in an expensive luxury car, but it doesn't have one. Neither did the race car, and taking out the sunroof certainly lowers the center of gravity. You don't have all that heavy equipment up at the top, but gives it a more focused feel. You also have a special rear diffuser in the RS6 GT, as you can see here, very much more aggressive than the rear diffuser design in the standard RS6 Avant, and very much more in keeping with the sort of race car theme of the GT. Now, as far as extra exterior upgrades, the rest of them are mostly limited to small cosmetic details like badging. You have an RS6 GT badge in the back, so that everybody knows this car is special, as if they didn't see from the color scheme. You also have a small, subtle GT logo on the front fender, the carbon fender, right where the brake cooling duct is located, and another little GT badge on the wheel, which again helps distinguish this car. Although, my very favorite exterior badging element in the RS6 GT is in the front grille, where the red Audi RS logo has been replaced with the colors that this car has, sort of the orange and the gray that fits in with its overall color scheme. That's a nice little subtle touch. Most people won't notice it, but if you do, it's kind of a cool nod to this car's livery and its heritage. And beyond all the cosmetic upgrades and some of the aero stuff, the lightweight parts, this car also gets some changes under the skin. And unfortunately, extra engine power isn't one of them. This car uses the same twin-turbo V8 as the standard RS6 Performance, which I recently reviewed, which means it has about 620 horsepower and about 630 pound-feet of torque. Those aren't exactly small numbers, but if you were hoping for some extra power from the GT, you won't find it. However, you will find improved suspension. The RS6 GT rides on upgraded coilover sports suspension intended to give it a more exciting handling experience, and it's adjustable to 3 different levels depending on exactly the type of driving experience you're looking to have. Also, because of the upgraded suspension, the RS6 GT sits a little lower than the standard RS6, about a half an inch lower, which gives it a more aggressive look and lower to the ground, lower center of gravity for a better handling experience. And by the way, one other item worth noting, even though this car doesn't have any extra power or different engine tuning compared to a standard RS6, it still sounds great. Take a listen to a few short revs from the RS6 GT. Unfortunately, that's one thing they couldn't copy between this car and the old Audi 90 IMSA race car, which has a side exhaust that comes out what would be the passenger door. And even though it's only a 5-cylinder engine, it's quite loud. Take a listen to that car and a few revs. The RS6 GT, where there are some other upgrades and changes compared to the standard RS6, the first and most obvious of which greet you the moment you open the door, where you have a few RS6 GT badges. One is the light projection that comes out of the bottom of the door. It doesn't just say RS6, it adds the GT. Same deal on the door sill, the RS6 GT logo is printed there, and on the floor mat, once again, RS6 GT. They've made sure you can distinguish this car even when you're just climbing in. Now, the next thing you'll notice is these seats, which are pretty special ones, very tight huggy carbon fiber sports seats with holes in the backrest for a racing seatbelt, and unfortunately, these aren't going to be the seats offered on the US spec RS6 GT. This particular car is a European spec car with these special sports seats, carbon fiber with manual adjustments. The US car will, however, have some pretty sporty seats, but they're the standard sport seats that you can get in the regular RS6. Nonetheless, they will have RS6 GT printed in the backrest, much like what you see here, just in sort of a less aggressive seat situation. Now, move beyond that, and one of the other things you notice instantly when you climb into this car is a little badge in the center console that says RS6 GT, and it shows the individual number of this car, obviously 172 of the 660 unit production run. That is a pretty cool badge, but the coolest part is it's also duplicated on the key. You can see right here, again, RS6 GT, and it gives your car's individual number. If you have one of these, don't lose your key. I don't know how they're going to replace the badge, so you definitely don't want to go down that road, but it's pretty cool to see that badge duplicated on the key, not just in a plaque in the car like so many other cars do. But anyway, a couple other items worth noting in here. For one, the dashboard, which you can see is Alcantara, a nice high-performance car surface. Unfortunately, that also is distinctive to the European model of this car, but have no fear, the US version of the RS6 GT will instead have carbon fiber here, which frankly is probably an improvement and fits in more with the ethos of this car. Also in this interior, and very noticeable from right when you climb inside, is all the stitching in here. You can see red stitching all throughout the seat, and then white stitching on the sides, which is carried over to other places. Red and white stitching on the door panel, as you can see, right next to each other there. And you also have red seat belts, which makes sense in a performance car with its red exterior accents. So some other nice performance-y touches that help set this car apart from a standard RS6. But anyway, aside from those upgrades for the RS6 GT, this car has your fairly typical RS6 Avant quirks and features on the inside. I'll review some of the highlights, starting with the gauge cluster screen, which I find to be absolutely fantastic. It's tremendously configurable. You can have it on basically any setting you want, including a full-screen map and various other different information displays, depending on precisely what it is you want to see. And there's a specific performance screen, as you can see here, that shows the tachometer displayed in this cool way and gives you other performance information on the go, which you might need if you're on the racetrack in your RS6. As for the other screens in this car, there are two center screens, an upper and a lower. The lower is primarily used for climate controls, as you can see. Yes, they are integrated into the screen, but since they have their own dedicated screen, the climate controls are primarily located in that spot virtually all the time. So even though you're not touching physical buttons, the layout stays basically the same, basically always, and so it's pretty easy to adjust the climate controls without taking your eyes off the road. You'll notice your heated seats are also integrated into the screen, but again, they usually don't go anywhere. They're pretty easy to press. Now, above that, you have Audi's infotainment system, which I've always felt is excellent. Not exactly my very favorite. It's not quite as intuitive or as large as some rivals like Mercedes-Benz new MBUX system, but very easy to use. You tap, it does what you want it to. The home screen is good, a 3-panel display that shows various different things, and frankly, it's all very easy to navigate and use and figure out. Now, as far as adjusting your drive modes in this car, you have two different options. At the base of these screens, there's an icon that says Drive Select, and you can press up or down to cycle through your different drive modes. But if you want something a little bit quicker, there's a button on the steering wheel marked RS, because this is an Audi RS car. And if you press that, it instantly pulls up RS1 and RS2 drive modes, which are pre-selected drive modes that you can hit at the push of a button with your thumb on the steering wheel to get the car into a sportier, more aggressive mode, rather than going through all the drive select and trying to figure out exactly what you want to dial up. It's right there, just push it, and you're RSing. And next up we move on to the back seat of the RS6 GT, which frankly is still roomy and comfortable, even though we're in the high-performance limited edition GT model. You still have all the practicality of your regular RS6, which means you got good knee room, leg room, headroom, as you can see. Decent space in here for me, a relatively tall adult in the back of this car. And you have all of your comfort and convenience features you would expect. Again, even though this is the GT, like a full dedicated rear seat climate system. You can adjust your rear seat temperature back here, control the airflow. You have your own dedicated vents right here, as you can see at the back of the front center console. And you even have heated rear seats, which you can turn on here, all to add to your comfort. Now, below that, you have some charge ports, 2 USB-C ports, as you can see, and then 1 cigarette lighter style port, so you can charge all your devices, even if you're in the high-performance GT. And when you drop the center armrest, you can see there's a little storage location back here, which is nice. And in the front part, you have cup holders so that you can, well, hold your cups. With that said, one nice upgrade for the RS6 GT in back. In addition to the Alcantara seat center with red stitching and white accent stitching, you also have your red seat belt back here, some performance touches. But the real GT specific upgrade is when you open up the door, again, RS6 GT is projected from the bottom of the door onto the pavement below, so even rear passengers know they're getting into the special RS6 GT. And finally, we move on to the RS6 GT cargo area, which, much like the back seat, is largely unchanged compared to the standard car, which means that it's very spacious, very wide, deep, flat. It gives you a lot of space back here, and it really makes this car's reputation for being both high performance and practical because of this great wagon cargo area. But again, mostly unchanged from the standard car, although that is a good thing. You have latches back here that you can use to drop the rear seats if you have some large item that you want to stick in back. And you also have this little netted off area over on the side for smaller stuff if you don't want them rolling around with your big items in the cargo area. So that's your RS6 GT, and you might be wondering about pricing. Well, like I said, there's only 85 of these coming to the United States, so they'll be in short supply. Audi hasn't yet announced pricing, but they told me it'll be under $200,000, somewhere in the under 200 range. Compare that to the standard RS6, which starts around $128,000, and then you add options. Transaction prices tend to be around $150,000. Obviously, this car is going to be more expensive than that since it's more exclusive, somewhere in that range. But that gives you a general idea. For me, I'm more curious about how it drives, especially with the upgraded suspension compared to the standard RS6, which I recently drove. So let's get it out on the road and find out.